Turning to another key issue here in Ohio and around the country, the opioid epidemic. Senator Klobuchar, CNN reached out to Ohio Democratic voters for their most pressing questions. Bree, a teacher in Proctorville, asks, in rural Ohio, the opioid epidemic has affected our communities and schools. I have many high school students who have lost one or both parents to heroin. Teachers are on the front lines daily witnessing these tragedies. How will you tackle this problem in general, but specifically, what will you offer people in rural communities where rehabilitation is not easily accessed and access to jobs is difficult?
Well, I want to thank her for this question. This is something that should never have happened to begin with. I remember when I was a prosecutor, these were not the kind of cases that were coming in our door, and it's gotten worse and worse, and we now know why. As the evidence is coming out of those lawsuits, probably one of the most horrible things that I saw was the email from one of the pharma executives that actually said, keep pumping them out, they're eating them like Doritos. So my first answer to that question, and which is included in my plan, is that the people that should pay for this, that should pay for the treatment, are the very people that got people hooked and killed them in the first place. And that is the people that are manufacturing these opioids. That's the first way. And you can, with a 2 cents per milligram tax, bring in the money, plus with the federal master settlement, to help in rural areas where they're so isolated, and also in urban areas where it's, by the way, not just opioids. There's still meth issues and crack cocaine issues. This is personal for me. My dad, he struggled with alcoholism his whole life. And by his third DWI, they said to him, the prosecutor, you got to face jail or you got to go to treatment. He picked treatment, and he was pursued by Grace. And he has been sober ever since. And now he's 91 and in assisted living. And he said to me last year, it's hard to get a drink around here anyway. But he still has an AA group that visits him there. And so for me, I believe that everyone in this country, including the people in rural America, have that same right to be pursued by Grace.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Steyer, how would you address the opioid epidemic that exists here in Ohio and around the country? Please respond.
Well, I think this is one of the most heartbreaking experiences that America's had. 72,000 people died of opioid overdoses last year. And that's not only a tragedy for them, it's a tragedy for their family and their communities. And so I think we have to treat this as a health crisis. We have to move the resources and the support there to try and help people. But I think that Senator Klobuchar makes a good point. The reason I'm running for president is that we have a broken government. And we have a broken government because corporations have bought it. And every single one of these conversations is about that broken government. It's about drug companies buying the government and getting what they want. It's about the gun manufacturers buying the government and get what we want. We need to break the corporate stranglehold on our government. I've put forward actual structural changes, including term limits, a national referendum, the end to the idea that corporations are people and have the rights of American citizens politically, and make it a lot easier to vote. These corporations have taken over our government, and 72,000 deaths last year are the tragic results.
Mr. Yang, you want to decriminalize the possession and use of small amounts of opioids, including heroin. How would that solve the crisis?
That's exactly right. And we have to recognize this is a disease of capitalism run amok. There was a point when there were more opiate prescriptions in the state of Ohio than human beings in the state of Ohio. And for some reason, the federal government thought that was appropriate. They ended up levying a $600 million fine against Purdue Pharma, which sounds like a lot of money, until you realize that company made $30 billion. They got a 2% fine, and they killed tens of thousands of Americans 8 an hour. So if the government turned a blind eye to this company spreading a plague among its people, then the least we can do is put the resources to work in our communities so our people have a fighting chance to get well. Even though this is not a money problem, we all know this is a human problem. And part of helping people get the treatment that they need is to let them know that they're not going to be referred to a prison cell. They will be referred to treatment and counseling. I talked to an EMT in New Hampshire, and he said he saves the same addicts over and over again. Because the fact is, after you save someone who's ODing, you just bring them back to their house and they OD again the following week. So we need to decriminalize opiates for personal use. We have to let the country know this is not a personal failing. This was a systemic government failing. And then we need to open up safe consumption and safe injection sites around the country because they save lives.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Congressman O'Rourke, is decriminalizing opioids part of the solution? Please respond.
Yes, it is, for many of the reasons that Mr. Yang just described. And also just from some personal experiences I've had as a member of Congress, where constituents of mine have come forward, in some cases publicly, at a town hall meeting to describe their addictions. I remember a veteran telling me that he bought heroin off the street because he was originally prescribed an opioid at the VA. Now, imagine if that veteran, instead of being prescribed an opioid, had been prescribed marijuana, because we made that legal in America, ensured that VA could prescribe it, expunged the arrest records for those who've been arrested for possession, and made sure that he was not prescribed something to which he would become addicted. I also want to agree with Senator Klobuchar. Until we hold those responsible accountable for their actions, Purdue Pharma, Johnson & Johnson, we're going to continue to have this problem going on again. So that veteran that I met, and anyone with drug addiction today, is not a problem for the criminal justice system. They're an opportunity for our public health system.
Senator Harris, you want to hold the drug manufacturers that fueled the crisis accountable. Are you in favor of sending those drug company executives to jail?
I am. And I will tell you, as a former prosecutor, I do think of this as being a matter of justice and accountability, because they are nothing more than some high-level dope dealers. They have been engaged. And I've seen it happen before. I've taken on the pharmaceutical companies when I was Attorney General of California and led the second largest Department of Justice. I've seen what they do. The biggest pharmaceutical companies, the 8 biggest pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies last year profited $72 billion on the backs of people like the families that we are talking about that have been overwhelmed by this crisis, which is a public health epidemic. And they knew what they were doing. They were marketing false advertising. They knew what they were pushing in communities and states like Ohio without any concern about the repercussions, because they were profiting and making big bucks. And yes, they should be held accountable. This is a matter of justice. And so as President of the United States, I would ensure that the United States Department of Justice understand that you want to deal with who is really a criminal. Let's end mass incarceration and end that failed war on drugs, and let's go over after these pharmaceutical companies for what they've been doing to destroy our country in states like Ohio.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary Castro, are you in favor of sending those drug company executives to prison? Please respond.
Yes, I am. They need to be held accountable, not only financially, but also with criminal penalties. And, you can draw a straight line between making sure that we hold executives accountable, whether it's these drug manufacturers or Wall Street executives that should have been held accountable a decade and a half ago.
Thank you.
Now to the issue of candidates and their health. Senator Sanders, I want to start with you. I want to start, we're moving on, Senator, I'm sorry.
I'm feeling... And Senator Sanders is in favor of medical marijuana. I want to make sure that's clear as well.
Senator Sanders, this debate does mark your... This debate, sir, does mark your return to the campaign trail. Okay, go ahead and finish your point, and then I'll ask my question, Senator.
I'm more than happy to answer your question, but I wanted to pick up on what Kamala and Corey and others have said. Let's take a deep breath. Take a look at this opioid epidemic. You have executives, CEOs of major pharmaceutical companies making tens of millions of dollars a year. And in this particular case with the opioids, they knew that they were selling a product to communities all over this country which were addicting people and killing them. And last year, the top 10 drug companies made $69 billion in profit. This is what unfettered capitalism is doing to this country. And it's not just the drug companies. Right now, the CEOs in the fossil fuel industry know full well that their product is destroying this world, and they continue to make huge profits.
Senator,
that is why we need a political revolution that says enough is enough to this behavior.